Copy paste.
Denmark. Welcome, everyone. You're right on time. We're going to give it just a few more minutes for everyone to trickle in, and then we will start the meetup. Matan asks, Amit, couldn't you arrange the office a little bit?
Is it a real office?
It's not. Is it an office or a green screen? That's, yeah, we don't know. It's just an amazing green screen.
It'll remain a mystery forever.
I still don't know. It could be a green screen.
I will show you my moves on that skateboard over there later.
Eleron says, I'm gonna take the guitar so they will believe you.
We'll break the mystery,
Yeah. Oh, still could be a green screen. I don't know. Yeah, no, obviously you're in the office.
There it is. No, if
it is real.
Screen, it is very sophisticated.
It's a very sophisticated set. It's like a movie studio right here. Great.
Entire
One more
office,
minute.
I moved them to the other area. No one is allowed to move.
Yeah, we have to do a lot of 3D modeling and augmented reality to make that possible.
Yeah.
It's been a lot of work.
Exactly. Yeah.
This is what he does all day instead of working. Awesome. Great. Well, we're 2 minutes in. Welcome everyone to is it May already? Wow. The May Superset meetup. Today we'll be hearing Amit Miran from Nielsen Israel talk about custom Viz plugins, how they develop and deploy and manage custom Viz plugins. And we have a great show. So you can take it away, Amit.
Thanks, Rini. Hi, everyone. I'm Amit. I work at Nielsen. I'm an R&D team lead. And lately I became a PMC and committer of Apache Superset. This is the agenda for today. So get ready. We'll start with some history. I started this journey about a year ago when I was assigned to spread Superset across the organization, trying to make teams adopt Superset internally to replace other tools or licensed tools that they're already using. Until one day, one of those teams came to me and said, could you customize one of those charts? They are nice, but they need to look more cutting edge than they are right now. And in that exact time, Evan Ruskas published that Hello World Development Guide. That was a crucial moment in the history of Superset. So we used that guide. We started creating those custom plugins that was required by our clients. And once we had them, we wanted to start delivering them into production. We already promised those. We already shown those on videos. And then it struck me that there is no official way of doing that. Isn't it right? This is why you're all here, right? So with the monorepo guru, Matan Bobby, and Simcha Schatz, a member of my team, we found a solution. We bundled the original Superset source code with our plugins and provided a final Docker image ready to be deployed. And this is how our solution looks like. In order for you to manage these plugins, you need to have your own separated repository, something similar to what Superset already has. Superset is kind of split it into the main repository and to the Superset UI, which is, this is how the Hello World guide instructs you to do. So in parallel to the Superset UI, you need to have your own Viz plugins repository. Let's have a look on how the repository looks like. So this is our repository. It is already open source. Everybody can use it and use even the Docker images bundled with the plugins inside. Even if you're not developing plugins, you can use ours. It's all free. That repository is using the mono-repo strategy. It means that you can manage multiple projects in a single repository, and they all rely on the common tools that are being used in that repository. As you can see here, these are our plugins, and they are being deployed into NPM just for the need, like they're being deployed into NPM, and then in the process of rebuilding the Docker image, those NPM packages are being downloaded and then installed inside the newly built Docker image. And then you can tag them the way you want to tag them and publish them wherever you want to publish them. So if that's the repository, how can you do it yourself? Because GitHub has this ability to, as you all know, you can always fork a repository, right? But instead of forking, I enabled the ability that this repository is a template repository. And if you click on that button, you can create a copy of our repository with a nice name or another name, which will be nicer. And then if you copy that, it will not take the Git history. You will create a copy just with the same files. Let's fast forward into the future and see that. This is generated from repository, the scaling robot plugins. And let's see how we did it, how I did it lately. I wanted to create my own separated from Nielsen repository. So first, this is the initial commit. This is what happens behind the scene when you're using the template. And then I went ahead and deleted most of the plugins there. I just left one of the most awesome ones that we have. Deleted all of the plugins, did some renaming to the projects. The repository is already generic. You just need to rename a few parameters inside and some README files. And then the rest of the tasks are basically about connecting to your new NPM organization or any other package manager that uses NPM protocol, and also connect it into a Docker registry, which in that case, I'm using Docker Hub. So let's just look in one of the commits. You see, it's kind of easy. I'm just changing a parameter in that file. What is that file? It's a GitHub action. This is how the magic happens. It's just one workflow, one CI workflow that does what I just explained. And basically, this is like the final steps. I'm using this credentials and publishing to that repository instead of Nielsen OSS. I have my new organization. This is where I publish the final image. Let's have a look. So as I said, I created a dedicated NPM repository, and you can already see that it has one plugin inside with some version, right? And in addition, you can see that we have that Docker image, which is based on the 1.2 version, which is not yet officially released, but accidentally I'm also the release manager of that version, so I allowed myself to kind of mix everything together. So I think I went over all of the high-level technical details of that. And let's just go over another technical issue that you need to have before you have your repository complete. Besides those commits that you need to have, you need to go into settings. go into your secrets and basically define those tokens. This is the NPM token you generated from the NPM account. This is the Docker user and token. You also can generate it from your Docker Hub account, and also Chromatic, which is basically an ability. We'll go over it soon enough. This is just an ability to review the plugins and manage plugins over time. And basically, it's kind of completing the entire life cycle of how you manage your plugins over time. So the next thing, which is the most important one, is the development experience. Let me just add another screen here. And let's see what happens. So, as you all know from the low-code development guide, you need to do this import in the main preset, right? And as you can see here, instead of being referring to the Superset UI repository, it is referring to that one. And there are additional changes you need to do in the package JSON. You need to npm link it. All of this is already pre-set up, and let's see what's the result of that interesting plugin.
Yeah, I want to make a quick comment if that's cool. So
yeah,
this is like very much like the proper way to do this, right? Like to if you want to set up your own repo with your own managed plugins with the same level of like kind of CI/CD and automation around around kind of deploying the plugins to npm, right, and all that like awesome automation, the same like kind of testing rigor, right? So I think that's a really great way to do it. If you're like, hey, we're going to invest, we're going to have our own repo with our own plugins. There are some more hacky ways, I guess, the hello world post, where you can just kind of fork the repo, add a plugin, compile it, and so there are some easier ways, but this is like really the proper good way if you want to have your own repo of plugins.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think the way I see it, like in the future, we will find a way to share those plugins in some sort of a marketplace that everybody will be able to share their own plugins, and everybody will just import each other's plugins. It will be a fun world to live in, right?
Yeah, totally. We'll talk some more about that maybe towards the end. I'll share a link to in the chat that's like around dynamic plugins. So we've done a fair amount of thinking around like how you compile a plugin and then kind of load it dynamically to enable that, that marketplace or that, that app store of plugin eventually. But yeah, we're definitely building in that direction. Awesome. Back to you.
Sure, thanks. So I built this dashboard, which is based on that additional plugin that I added here. It's the compose chart. It has similar abilities to the existing plugins like the bar chart and the time series. It takes everything inside and allows you to basically have all of the XY chart abilities. So this is, for an example, a time series where you can do time graining and show bar charts and additional stuff in that area. Here are some additional capabilities that you could have. These are all nice, and you can also view a sneak peek to 1.2, which is focused on the native filters ability. I enabled the feature flag here. It's the dashboard native filters, and you can see here that
Amit, we can't see your we only see your code editor.
Oh, that's.
And actually, even earlier, we could only see one screen at a time. So just a heads up. So we can see both now.
Okay, I'll go back again. This is the amazing dashboard that I was talking about 2 minutes without showing. You can see here that this is what we call the compose chart. It allows you to compose different types of visualization on an XY chart. It allows you to show bar chart, line charts, scatter, and other elements. You can vertically lay out or horizontally lay out um, those visualizations, and you can have other abilities like sorting and breakdowns and time series and any other abilities that needs to happen on an XY chart. And basically the experience on the code is that if you see here, I'm using PyCharm, and I have those two repositories. I have the original source code and the scaling robot plugins. Every change that I make here is being reflected once I refresh the page, or basically it's already hot reloading. So every time I make a change, it's reflected here, and I'm able to like have a quick development life cycle of everything. How it works basically on your repository, you will see on the docs, you will see that webpack config, and it's similar to the original one. It just has a slight modifications that allows you to basically it points to the watch that it also needs to look at that directory and on those packages and do hot reloading every time something changes on the package. And then you have this complete life cycle of development experience. And let's see what happens. You did a change, you change something in the compose chart, you want to review it, you want to see if something breaks. Let's see what happens. So I pre-prepared this pull request. I opened I made a change in the compose chart, added a time series support, and let's look at the PR. So it has a few workflows. The basic workflow is just running just test and if you look at the code here, let's look at the compose chart plugin. It has a test suite, which is basically a just testing, and what it tests basically it's basically an integration test between the input you're giving to the plugin itself, and how it propagates to the underlying library, visualization library that you're using. And basically what's behind it, like if you look at the snapshots, you will see how the object looks after it renders with the underlying library. In our use case, we are using recharts. So these are just how recharts is showing the object. It's not the final one, but we're not testing recharts, right? We're just testing what we change, and it basically just the code of the compose chart itself. We're having those use cases which we expect the component to behave differently on different inputs, and that's one type of testing. But when you have a visualization, you want to test it properly. So this is why we have Chromatic. I mentioned it before. You can go into that link, and it shows you basically a change set of the changes you have made. It visualizes the differences, like what happened before and what happens after. And then you can easily see the changes that, and you can understand, like, are those changes are breaking? Is something is incorrect here? Maybe something is badly wrong here and I don't want to use it. So we have, and it's all based on stories, on storybooks. You probably already knows that if you're a React developer, and those stories are being managed on the same, on your repository, on your Viz plugins repository. You can see the stories here, and you can add additional stories according to your use cases. And you can see here that we have like those small, like we have this ticks combination where we change the layout and we change everything, and we check that all of the ticks are not cutting off the edges and all of those use cases. And it's always like easy to see, did I break something? Did I change something? It's kind of easy to to adjust that. And then the code looks good. I reviewed everything, so I just approve the PR from here. I go back. I go back here, and there is the additional phase, which is just, it is kind of similar to the earlier step, but instead of reviewing the UI, you can review the snapshots changes themselves, like the actual changes of the snapshot, the DOM changes. If you're a technical person, you will be able to see to understand the changes better. And let's keep that process and basically approve the entire PR. And let's see what happens. So I go back here. I merge that pull request. This is the first pull request of that scaling robot plugins, and I hope it will grow. So let's see what happens once you merge. In addition to running the test again and running the chromatic, for you to have like a stable chromatic version, like a master version of that, of the latest merged commit, there is this release process. And basically, as I mentioned before, the release process is just another workflow, and what happens behind the scenes. We can just go over high level of the details here. So behind the scenes, we are using Lerna. Lerna is a technology to manage mono repos. It is based on tags, on Git tags, and and also on I forgot the name for it. I think it's semantic commits. Yeah, it's semantic commits, and basically it really depends on what you wrote on the comment and the changes that you did on the plugin itself. It decides on the new version that you will have. It looks for the changes, and then basically what Lerna does after going through those steps. Let's see how it moves quite fast. And then eventually, once we have that step, it will be, the plugin will all, you see Lerna runs here, and then the plugin will be published here. And then I hope that soon enough, we will see like the new version instead of that really minor version. We will see a new version here that runs. And the last step is basically checking out the source code of Superset, preparing for the build. It basically, what it does behind the scenes, it changes the package JSON, adds the additional dependency, which is the plugin that we're using, and also referring to your NPM registry and all of those other stuff. Add some additional code for Superset to be able to load external plugins, something like that. And after that process runs, all of this new source code is ready, and we'll just build in the Docker image again and deploying it into your dedicated Docker registry.
Quick,
I think I'm
quick life question here. So wondering if the chromatic, like basically all the infrastructure there, is that very similar to what's happening in Superset UI, or is that kind of custom here?
I think Superset UI is heading towards chromatic. It's still not active yet, or something is kind of broken there, but I'm not sure what was first, this one or Superset UI. As far as I know, something in Superset UI doesn't really has active chromatic builds.
Sorry, I got disconnected, but I think I caught most of your answer.
Okay. As you can see here, because it was kind of a major change, so the version was bumped in the NPM, and then the life cycle of rebuilding the Docker image runs. This will take quite a long time. So we will not wait for it, but you will be able to see it in that Docker registry, public registry. And also later, you'll be able to just use that scaling role plugins, see the commits that were done here, follow those instructions and basically use the original template in order to create your own plugins.
Real quick, Amit, do you mind just focusing on your right window? Or I think some people are having a hard time seeing the text.
Sure. This is the right time for it.
Perfect.
I can show you nice visualizations. I can go over some native filters capabilities if you would like to see them. But I think besides that, I think it's time for just to talk a little bit. And Max, I think you wanted to mention it by yourself about the future and how eventually we're gonna do this the proper way.
Yeah, I don't know all the details, but I know the high level story too. I know Aaron's been working on this at Preset, and it's on our short-term roadmap to go and push this forward. So the idea generally is like we want to offer a path for people to Webpack, like compile their plugins as just like JavaScript little bundles, and then for us to start. Well, there's already a PR that's been merged that I copied, I believe, in the chat, so people can look. But the way it works is we added some CRUD screen, or a screen in which in Superset in which you can go and add some dynamic plugins. And eventually, I think we want for all of the plugins to be loaded in that fashion. So that means that in everyone's instance of Superset, administrators would be able to go and pick the exact plugins that they want to expose or not. And eventually, so the step one is really just to point to a URI that has a compiled plugin somewhere, right? Like hopefully that's a certified spot, and that's there's going to be different plugin repository, but essentially you go and pick the plugins and you add them, remove them at will, and then and I think like eventually, so that interface is very simple, where you click a plus and you put a URL, you give it a name, and you hit save. Eventually that will be something much more like a little like ecosystem app store type of thing, not where we charge, right? But where you go and you see the plugins, maybe you can browse them, you can navigate them, and then you can easily kind of try them on in your environment.
Okay. I think we
Awesome.
got to the point where you can start asking questions.
Great. Etienne, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I'm sorry. We can now import Viz plugins dynamically. It seemed to provide the same function while sticking to vanilla Superset without having to maintain a fork. What are for you, Amit, what are the pros and cons of this versus the dynamic plugin approach?
So first of all, as I said, when I started this, there wasn't any solution. I tried collaborating with Aaron, which Max mentioned earlier, but the dynamic plugins wasn't mature enough, and I think even now it's still not mature enough. Like it doesn't know how to manage versions, and I don't know. Like I haven't tried it myself, and and when I tried it, it wasn't that successful. So I think we will need to wait a few evolutions until it will be fully matured.
Yeah, so and that's why dynamic plugins are still behind a feature flag today, right? So that's because the interface is still settling. We're still like figuring out exactly what it's going to be, and the experience of like if you go and embrace something that's still settling, then that means that in the future it might not work the same way, and it might still settle. Where I think this approach of having your own repo, building them, weaving them in, so you have a lot more kind of control that way. So currently, if you want to build something solid today that is going to work, it's not going to break in the future, I think that's the right approach. The dynamic plugin should be out sometime soon, but it's a fairly complex problem to solve, right? To build just the right amount of JavaScript and to make sure that you define the boundaries to where the plugin, the thing that you build, you don't want for it to build the rest of Superset, and these two bundles need to work well together. So it's fairly tricky to do that well. but it's a problem we're confident we're going to solve very soon.
Great. Artem, next question. Artem asks, is it possible to use a Superset UI in an external React project where you want to use the backend of Superset and only some parts of Superset frontend in our React.js project? How can I hide all the unnecessary stuff? Do I need to change the Superset, the source code of Superset frontend, or can I just do the iframe? So lengthy question, but maybe someone wants to just quickly talk about strategies for embedded, basically.
Yeah, I could talk about that. So I think like the goal, the longer term goal is to expose all the building blocks of Superset for people to compose their own applications, right? So that means like we would expose the visualization plugins, dynamic plugins, being able to embed a visualization that does interact with the Superset backend or that to which you provide data. So I think we're going to work a fair amount on that over the next like months and years, so that really you can kind of just pick the bits and pieces of Superset that you want and build your own data product from scratch. The reality is that today, if you want to do that, there's different components you can reuse, but it's not necessarily super modular in the exact way that you might want to use Superset today. So we'll be working on embedded. So I think we're going to be providing new iframe type of embedding that are more rich too, and then eventually like an SDK where you can embed visualization and control them externally, right? So you could imagine like being able to embed a subset of the Explore view, like the no-code Explorer that we have in Superset, to say like, hey, I want to embed this chart, but expose only a subset of the controls on it. So I'm going to allow people to do, say, time filters, and pick a metric, but not to do, X, Y, and Z type of interaction. So that's part of the direction there. One thing that we've seen done quite a bit is people at places like Lyft and Airbnb, where I worked before, people using the Superset backend, what we call like essentially the data access layer to build data products. So just to leverage the Superset backend to build completely different front end. And when you do that, so you'd build like your own JavaScript app, your own kind of front end app, the same way you'd build any data product. But the Superset data access layer offers a few nice things. So connectivity to different databases. It does auditing, right? It keeps track of who ran what query. It does authentication, permissioning. So authentication, permissioning, auditing, and caching, which are all things that you may want if you're building a data product. So this data access layer too, we're interested in packaging it independently as maybe its own Python project, so that people could use this component if they're interested in that. So very much a lot that will be going on and kind of untangling the different pieces of Superset and using those as exposing those building blocks so people can use them to build other things. Today you kind of have to figure out what you want and whether you have to do a bit of a surgery if you want to do that in a context, right? So that's the long answer. Hopefully it answers the question here.
I can also extend on that a little bit, that at Nielsen, we're embedding Superset in an iframe in a standalone mode, the entire dashboard, quite a lot in different applications. And lately I saw that one of the solutions that we came up with in order for us to be able to communicate externally outside of the iframe. So what we did is actually another invention of Matan Bobby, which I mentioned earlier. So what we did basically is we created our own custom plugin, which is not here. It's like an internal one, and that plugin communicates with the parent front-end application via post messaging, which is a mechanism inside the browser, and then basically you have an API to interact with like between your hosting application and the Superset dashboard. And by having that plugin, that plugin can instruct the entire dashboard to apply filters and to apply time filters and other elements like that. And it means that the dashboard is controllable from an external application. It is possible.
Yeah, so we're definitely like on the roadmap. So we're working on embedded now at Preset, and there's like multiple phases that we're kind of cutting as to how we're gonna improve embedded over time. But there's going to be improvement on the iframe side, which is like more dynamic type of iframe embedding, right? So right now, what you can do with the iframe is embed a chart or embed a dashboard, and then you're more or less on your own from that point, right? It's fairly static. So one thing is on the Explorer side to be able to embed controls as well. Like, so you would embed some of the left panel from the Explorer where you can do some interaction. So that's one topic. There's a lot around authentication too. So we're looking pretty deeply as to like how we can allow unauthenticated users that are not authenticated against Superset to have access to through like ephemeral tokens. So that's something that we'll be working on. And then the SDK, which is more like how can you like, you know, import in a React app or even just in a JavaScript app, being able to import some chart components, and then that would circumvent completely the iframe, and then you would have a lot more control over these components, where you might be able to say like, hey, I want to apply a filter, I want to without having to do the typical hacks that you have to do on the iframe side of things, because it's always been hard to communicate between the parent page and an iframe. There's some hacks there. Often if you want to put these hacks in place, like Amit was talking about, you have to do certain things around headers and the things that are like might be dubious from a security standpoint. So with the SDK, we could offer like the exact level of control that people want, right? And then that means like then we have a clear API, we have like really comprehensive way for you to import Superset objects, whether they're charts, dynamic charts, controlled, uncontrolled, and then be able to make them do exactly what you want them to do. And that's definitely part of the vision here.
Great. Shiraz asks, I have a web page which I've created using D3.js. I want to use what is on that web page as a plugin. Do I have to map it out using React in order to use it as a custom plugin? Basically, how do you go from a web page that has D3 code running in it into a plugin that can fit into the lifecycle Amit is talking about?
I don't know, Amit, if you want to take a crack at this, but I think the answer there is like you should follow the Hello World blog post that we have that we link to. I think this explains kind of step by step how you would build a plugin from scratch. And you know, if you have like one of these, like I think what's called blocks.org, where there's a lot of like these D3 examples, or you know, whatever JavaScript code you might have running in a sandbox somewhere. You know, this blog post will explain to you how to tie it into Superset fairly well. So, you know, on the Superset side, we need to emit a query, get some results, like, you know, get the query results. And that's pretty much handled by the framework pretty clearly. So you can control that, but you can start at a place where you have your group by and your metrics, define all this stuff. And then your JavaScript little sandbox or plugin, you can write essentially a function inside your plugin that will receive all this information of what's coming from the controls with the data and the metadata. And then with all of this, it's for you to kind of weave that into your D3 examples. I think for people who've written a fair amount of D3 code or like data visualization code, I think it's pretty easy, or it's not too hard. I think it's like a half day to a weekend project maybe to be able to build a plugin, depending on how much you're familiar with the plugin, you know, with writing, say, D3 code or data visualization code. With the Hello World, I think it's nice because you can quickly get to a place where you have something working that says Hello World, and then you get your data and your metadata, and you can start kind of passing that into your JavaScript object in your sandbox, and you have access to the DOM, where you have the DOM, the document object model element that you can start, kind of putting your visualization under. So it's a pretty it's kind of as easy as we could make it at the time. I think over time we'll make it easier and easier for people to build plugins from scratch or from examples, right? So one great way to learn too is to look at the plugins repo that we have. Maybe we can share a link there. But you can look at the code and see how those plugins are built. And then you can maybe start from 1.2 and start, hammering at it and changing and tweaking it.
Great. We have one last question right now by TS. After developing a visualization, what is the current workflow for distributing that visualization and integrating it into other people's Superset deployments, since we don't have dynamic Wiz plugins yet? So maybe you want to kind of mention your NPM package publishing, Amit.
Yeah, but I think I understand the question. So let's imagine two different people have different Wiz plugins repositories, and they want to use each other's plugin, and so that will be a problem in the current status. So I think I have a quite solid idea on how to do that. It will be easy. I think I will create a PR soon. Basically, what we need to have is in the CI process, besides loading your internal plugins that you just developed, you can probably on the package JSON or somewhere as a custom parameters. You will also add additional npm packages that already exist publicly, and then in the bundling process, in the release process, in addition to your plugins, it will just take external plugins and bundle them all together, and that will be kind of the start of a marketplace, if I see it correctly.
That's one approach, right? There's this pointing to repos and making your own build, and then the other approach would be like with the the binary files that are kind of bundled with metadata. So I think eventually we'll get to a place where the way to publish a plugin pack or a plugin individually or a set of plugins would be that you build a binary, you tag a version number to it, and then you add probably like a metadata, like YAML file along with it. So really a plugin would be a JavaScript binary or a compiled kind of a Webpack built JavaScript bundle along with metadata. Probably put that in a repo as a compiled thing, and then we would just kind of point to that repo, discover it, and kind of hot load it. So that's one way. If you want to build your own things, then yeah, I think like Amit's way of like how you would kind of build plugins, like find the source code and build it and package it and bundle it and put it in a Docker is the alternative. Like the current approach, if you want to do that, you're gonna have to kind of do that on your own, which is like fairly more complicated. Is that the way? Do you see it that way longer term too? Amit, that we would just go towards like the more bundled built things for sharing plugins? It seems like a better approach to me. Or is there a need for building all the plugins together?
I think
environment?
Eventually, like I totally agree, loading dynamically plugins is the way to go. I think it really depends on the technology that we are using right now, and it's more about loading modules dynamically in JavaScript, which is kind of in the middle of being mature enough, and we need to walk this through. But on the short term, what I was trying to say is that in your own repository, you can refer to others' NPM modules, package modules, and bundle them together with your modules. That was this is just like an additional feature that we could have here, and then you will all be able to collaborate. But yeah, for sure, dynamic plugins is the way to go eventually.
Yeah, and talking a little bit more about dynamic plugins, some things we've talked about in the past was having this notion of certified plugins too, and because there's clearly some security implication if you go and install like just anyone's plugin and it's pre-built. There's a notion of trust there. There could be malicious code into this. So I think it's going to be important to have a way to certify plugins and to know where you're bringing plugins from. So if you bring it from, say, I don't know, the preset or the Airbnb or the Nielsen, GitHub organization, you can kind of trust these organizations. But there will be, this challenge for us to have some sort of aggregation of all the plugins that exist and categorization of them. So I think like we're looking to improve this part, when you go and pick a visualization in Superset, now you just have the list of all the visualization types that exist, including core visualization, eventually plugins, and there's like the varying degrees of rigor. Maybe like some plugins are really good, they're really trustworthy, like not trustworthy from a security standpoint, but they work very well, they're very mature. Other plugins are more experimental, or other visualization are more experimental. So we're looking to add a whole layer of semantics around plugins and visualization, so people understand a little bit better what they're using.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a wrap for today. That's all the questions we have. Thanks everyone for coming to this great event. Thanks Amit for the awesome presentation. We will share the recording and slides once we have those in the coming days, and hope to see you at the next meetup. Thanks.
Thanks everyone.
Bye-bye.